So yes, like I said, this is a webinar market engagement for our audiovisual equipment and installation services framework, which will be replacing the current iteration with the reference AVI 3083 NW. So I'll just start by introducing NWUPC for those who don't know who we are. I know some of you on this call today will be incumbents and some will be new suppliers who haven't had any dealings with NWUPC before. So NWUPC, we are a not-for-profit company by limited guarantee. Our primary aim is to work in partnership with higher education institutions and to collaboratively drive value through the responsible procurement of goods and services. We have 24 full members within the higher education sector and associate and affiliate members drawn from across the public sector. And you can see our full list of members on the NWUPC website. If you just type in NWUPC into Google, we'll come up as the first hit. We are one of 8 UK purchasing consortia, and we work in partnership as UK UPC to establish routes for higher and further education bodies to purchase goods and services. 6 of the purchasing consortia collaboration are APUC, HEPQ, LUPC, NEUPC, and SUPC, and we also work with Crescent Purchasing Consortium, which is CPC, and we work with TUCO as well. The 2 additional organisations focus on energy and catering, and we also work with CPC, who are a purchasing consortium for further education academies and schools. The 2 organisations that will be named on this framework agreement are NWUPC and CPC. So this is a regional agreement. NEUPC does run a national agreement, which is available to the rest of the consortia that have already been named within my little speech here. So first of all, why NWUPC? So this is basically, why do our members choose NWUPC and why do they prefer to maybe go through a framework than to go through the open market? It's because our agreements are accessible to all members of the higher education sector, with the wider public sector also named. We offer a procurement, contract regulation compliant tender process. We have pre-agreed terms and conditions. Our call-off exercises are much faster and less process heavy for both our suppliers and our members than running a full tender exercise. So we aim to basically save our members time, and we save their resources as well. There's also opportunities for savings through aggregation of spend for both our suppliers and our members. Our suppliers have access to marketing opportunities, including attendance and sponsorship opportunities at our regional consortia annual conference and COOP. Also through consortia newsletters, case studies, articles, advertisements, and product features, and such of the likes. So in terms of this engagement opportunity, the aim of this particular webinar is to provide some background to this tender opportunity. So it's quite specific to this framework as opposed to NWUPC as a whole. We just wanted to introduce the market to ourselves as an organisation, and then I also wanted to provide you with some information on key aspects of this framework that's different from the current iteration that some of you on the call are already used to and some of you are probably not aware of. So a little background to our project or the tender, the framework. So we lead on this framework for AV equipment and installation services on behalf of our members and on behalf of CPC members. The current agreement in place expires on the 31st of August, and the focus of this particular tender is to put in place the replacement framework. The current iteration of this framework was due to expire on the 29th of February, but it has been extended to cover a break in supply due to extended project timelines and various delays we've had here and there. So we've extended the current framework to expire on the 31st of August, sorry, with the aim of this new framework going live by the 1st of September. The current value of this framework stands at approximately £60 million. And we've got an estimated value of the replacement framework at £67 million. Moving on to the scope and coverage of the framework. The current iteration of this framework has two lots. We've got one lot for the supply and delivery of all AV equipment. So that's your projectors, your monitors, screens, everything that is encompassed within the AV space. And the second lot is for the supply, delivery, and installation and associated services. Again, this includes all AV equipment and also includes servicing, maintenance, proactive and reactive services, programming, training, de-installation, consultancy, design services, anything that falls under the umbrella of associated services, our members will be able to procure using Lot 2. For the next iteration, the one that we are going out for to market for at some point today, it will cover the same scope, but it's been expanded slightly. There isn't a major variation. Lot 1 will remain the same and covers all of the Northwest CPC region and Northern Ireland because it's a supply-only lot. Lot 2 will also remain the same in terms of coverage and scope. We have expanded the scope this time around to include the leasing of AV equipment, which our members have expressed interest in. This will be under supplier terms, but things like installation, maintenance, training, all of that will be expected to remain under the NWUPC framework terms. We're also going to be reintroducing a Lot 3 to the framework. There has been a Lot 3 previously, but there isn't one in the current framework. And that lot will be specific to Northern Ireland only. The scope for that in terms of service offering will be the exact same as Lot 2 for equipment, installation, associated services and the like. And leasing will also, again, be included within that. In terms of the leasing, we've not made that a mandatory requirement for our suppliers to be able to provide to access the framework or to gain a place on the framework. So if it's something that you as a supplier, you're bidding for the framework and you do offer that service, that's great. But not offering that service does not exclude you from competing, submitting a tender and potentially earning yourself a place on the framework. The full scope of each lot will be detailed within the ITT and the spec, which is available via EU Supply once the tender has been published. So the contracting route that we have, what is a framework agreement? So this is just in case there's anybody on the call who doesn't know what a framework agreement is, just a quick explanation as to what it is. It's an agreement between one or more contracting authorities and one or more economic operators. So contracting authorities would be ourselves, NWUPC, our members, CPC, and the economic operators being yourselves, the suppliers that are on this call today. The purpose of which is to establish the terms governing contracts to be awarded during a given period, in particular with regards to price. It's not a contract and there is no commitment to purchase. So we don't mandate that our members use our framework agreement, but we do market the benefits of our framework agreements to our members to make it, to basically show them the benefits of using the agreement and encourage them to do so. But we do not guarantee spend through you as a supplier being on our framework. Call-off contracts will be formed by member institutions under the framework agreement. Again, like I said, we don't mandate the use of our agreements, but we gain prior commitment from our members around their appetite for an agreement and specific member requirements so that we're able to shape our frameworks in a way that makes it usable for our members, meaning that they are more likely than not going to use our framework for their requirements. So these are the publication sites that you will be able to access the agreement from in terms of submitting your tender. So we'll publish to the Finder Tender Service. We'll also publish to Contracts Finder, and we'll also publish to TED, which is for OJU. And that is just because there are some of our members that still have funding that requires us to publish our opportunities on the official journal of the EU. Moving on to our e-tendering system, it's called EU Supply. Some of you will already be registered on this if you've tendered with NWUPC before. If you haven't tendered with NWUPC before, you will need to get yourself registered because this is the only way that you can submit your tender or submit any questions. Details of how to do this will be included within the publication that will go live on the sites that I showed you on the previous slide. As I said, tenders are to be submitted via this portal only. Submissions will not be accepted through any other medium, although you will have my contact details because they are listed within the publication. Any emails that come directly to my inbox will not get a response, or communication, questions or anything specifically regarding this tender does need to come through our tendering portal so that it's compliant and we have an audit trail of everything that has gone on with regards to the tender itself. The tender process. So NWUPC, we use the open procedure, and that has two parts to it. We have the selection questionnaire, and this has been developed by the Crown Commercial Service. And we have the award criteria, which is made up of pricing and requirements. And then for lots 2 and 3, it also includes a quality segment for the award criteria. So the selection questionnaire, it has these sub-criteria in here. It's taken from the CCS template, which we use for all of our requirements. And the questions cover areas such as grants for mandatory exclusion, discretionary exclusion, economic and financial standing, which is a pass-fail question. It's a liquidity ratio, and if your assets are less than your liabilities, then suppliers will fail this criteria. We also have a minimum turnover requirement, and that will be your minimum financial turnover in the most recent financial year. The minimum turnover requirements for each lot do differ. So if whatever lot that you are submitting your tender for, please just make sure to check the requirements for the lot that you are applying for. There's also insurance requirements. Again, there is differing requirements for each lot. As standard, we would require your employer's liability, public liability, and product liability. And then for lots 2 and 3, we also require professional indemnity because you're going to be installing consultancy, design, that sort of thing. And within the selection questionnaire, you'll see the monetary values that we've placed on that we require you to have, and also be able to evidence when it comes to award. We also have the technical and professional ability, and that includes your experience and referee details. And then we've got standard things like your Modern Slavery Act, your compliance and your assurance, which again, pass or fail requirements. There's minimum requirements that need to be met. Again, these are all detailed within the selection questionnaire that you'll have access to once you register for the tender. So moving on to award criteria. This is split into customer requirements, price, and quality. Quality is only relevant to lots 2 and 3 only. And I'll just give you the weightings as we've split them up. So for lot 2, it's heavily weighted towards price. However, the customer requirements segment is still important. That's weighted at 30%, and our price weighting is 70% for lot 1. For lot 2, we've got our customer requirements weighted at 30%. Price is 35%, and the quality criteria is 35%. And then for lot 3, we've got it weighted at 35% for customer requirements, 20% for price, and 45% for quality. So it's important at this point that I let you know, you can apply for every single lot that's on the framework. However, you will only be awarded to a maximum of 2 lots. So if you apply to lots 2 and 3, you can only be awarded onto lot 2, even if you're successful on lot 3. And if you apply to lots 1, 2, and 3, if you're successful on lot 1, as long as you fit within the maximum amount of number of suppliers that we've stated will be awarded onto that lot, you will earn yourself a place onto that lot. Can't tell at this moment if there are any questions because I can't see teams, so I'll just keep going and I'll try and address them at the end. Okay, so responsible procurement is part of the way that we tender, and this is normally included within our customer requirements section. It's normally quite heavily weighted again within that criteria because it is a massive area of interest for our members and ourselves as an organisation. Also, the tender will include a requirement to complete the net positive tool. Again, this will be more important if you are awarded a place onto the framework, because it's one of the requirements and it's also a contractual obligation. Our terms and conditions. So the framework will be governed by two sets of terms and conditions. One is the framework agreement, and that's the relationship between NWUPC and the supplier. And the other one is the call of terms and conditions, and that's the relationship between our members, our member institution and the suppliers. Both of these are issued with the tender process. Any non-compliance with regards to the terms and conditions and the tender as a whole must be detailed within the non-compliance section of the tender, and you have to include it within your tender return. Any areas that you raise after the submission will not be considered. Any non-compliance have to be resolved before the award of the framework agreement. It is at the sole discretion of NWUPC to agree the matters raised by the tenderers within the non-compliance statement. If we believe that the matters cannot be agreed, then the supplier will not continue the tender process. Awarding contracts under a framework. So we have three routes that our members can go to award a contract under the framework. They can go either direct award, desktop exercise, or mini/further competition. For direct award, members can contract directly with the highest scoring / top ranked supplier on the agreement when their requirements meet those outlined in the original tender documents. If they want to award via desktop exercise, if they're comfortable with the terms of the proposed contract and they don't require any amendment or supplementary conditions to this, then they may amend the award criteria to reflect their local requirements by a maximum of 20% of the criterion. So for example, if price is weighted at 60% and customer requirements are weighted at 40%, and the member wish to increase the weighting of the price because they have a restricted budget, then they can amend the price up to 68%, which is a 20% increase, but then they would have to reduce the customer requirements to 32%, so that it still adds up to 100% overall, but they varied both of them by up to a maximum of 20%. We provide our members with a desktop calculator to enable them to do this, so it's not manual calculations. And then last but not least, there's mini or further competition. When the requirements set out in the framework agreement are not sufficiently precise enough for our members, then they can undertake a mini competition to the suppliers on the framework. The lots don't cross over with each other. So if our member is going out under lot 3, only the suppliers under lot 3 are eligible to compete if they're going out for mini competition. The same goes for lot 1 and lot 2. So they can't run a competition under lot 3 and, for example, invite lot 2 suppliers to compete. It's not compliant with the framework and they wouldn't do that. Supplier guide to tendering. So we have a guide to tendering, and I'll make this available within the documentation that you'll be able to get yourself on EU Supply. And there's also an interactive presentation. Again, I'll make that available to yourselves on EU Supply. So the next couple of slides, I'm just going to go through some tips that we have for tendering in order to just give you guidance to, I guess, be as successful as possible if you're going to go through this process of submitting a tender. Top tips for tendering. Number 1 is to get to the point. So this just refers to keeping your responses quite concise. It's crucial that you strike a balance between being concise and being detailed. The evaluators can only assess what you've explicitly stated within your response. So you need to keep your response clear and you need to keep it to the point. You should also pay attention to any word limits or character limits that have been provided. Because if you exceed those limits that we've stated, anything past the limit will not be assessed and it won't earn you any extra marks. Also, dive into the specifics of your response without any sort of unnecessary preamble, because it won't add any value to your evaluation. So when I say that, what I mean is sometimes when we ask a question, you might be tempted to give a sort of intro to your organization. For example, supplier A is the UK's leading so-and-so. That line won't gain you any extra marks and you've reduced your character count, whereas you need all the characters you can get to be able to give your response and hopefully get the best marks. So just any preamble that won't score you any marks, there's no point in adding that to your response, because it adds no value to the response that you're giving, and it adds no value to the evaluator who's also evaluating your responses. Number 2 is to use the question to structure your response. So the question itself will highlight key areas that you need to cover within your response. For example, we might have an overarching question, and then we'll break that down into bullet points of areas that we want you to cover within your response. So a good strategy for this is to tackle each of those points individually within your response, so you know that you're hitting every single one. And you can do this by either dedicating a separate paragraph to each point, or using relevant subheadings, or even using bullet points, just so it's clear to the evaluator that you're hitting each point of the question that's been asked. And this ensures that there's clarity for you as the tenderer and us as evaluators. And it's also important to understand that the evaluator needs to read, understand, and score your response. So there needs to be clarity within whatever you're submitting. And while you may understand your response perfectly, the evaluator might not do so, and that may cause you to lose points. So using a structured approach to your response will help you to ensure that nothing gets missed or nothing gets lost in translation. Number 3 is tailoring your response to the customer. So when crafting your response, it's important, I would say, to avoid including generic policies unless this has been explicitly requested. So instead, focus on addressing the specific requirements of the contract. The buyer ourselves, we're interested in what you can do for us in relation to our specific needs or the specific needs of our members, as opposed to generic propositions or past successes that you've had, which you can include as an example, but that can't be the basis of your entire response to a question. Every question within the ITT will emphasize this framework agreement, so specifically speaking about the framework that you're tendering for. So your response should be tailored accordingly, and consider what the customer wants, what NW wants, what our members want, and how you can deliver that within the context of the framework agreement. Tip number 4 is to use the complete tender document set to inform your response. So when you're reviewing the documents, pay close attention to the contract-specific requirements. For example, there's a specification of requirements that comes out with this tender. So I would recommend obviously reading that document in full, so that when you're crafting your response, you can tailor it to what it is that we want, what it is that we are expecting as detailed within our specification of requirements. Your offering should align with what our contract specifics, and it's important to form your proposal in line with these requirements to ensure that it aligns with our contract. We also provide you with a scoring methodology, so make sure that you refer to that. Make sure that you refer to it when you're writing your response, because it outlines what we expect in your response to earn the full available marks. After completing your response to a question, I would review it alongside the scoring methodology and just check off the required points and stated in the methodology. When you're confident that they're all present, then you can move on to the next response. I think that is a good way of approaching responding to this, especially if you don't have a big team and you're a small team trying to tackle it, because it can be a little bit of a mammoth task. And just remember that you can only be awarded marks based on the requirements of the question and the scoring methodology. Evaluators can't award marks for points made outside of the scope of the question. So even if the content is good, if it's not answering the question that we've asked, you're not going to score any marks for that. So avoid over specifying your response to the question that we've asked you. Next is to always include the how. So when you're responding to a question, always include the how. The question outlines what NWPC requires you to demonstrate, such as the management of stock levels, ensuring the continuity of supply. So simply stating that you will manage stock levels, that's not sufficient to gain you the marks and to gain you the scores. You have to explain how you will do this, describe the specifics of the tasks that's involved, the resources, the personnel that's required, and how all of these activities provide assurance that stock levels will be maintained, for example. in accordance with service level agreement, for example. The scoring methodology emphasizes providing detail. So ensure that your response includes thorough explanations of the methods and the processes that are involved. The next tip is to provide examples where possible to support your how. So as I said earlier, the responses that we're looking for, we want you to tailor it to the framework and tailor it to our requirements. However, you can talk about your past successes if you're using them as an example, as supporting evidence, but not if that is the whole basis of your response. So it's really about how you phrase your response and how you tailor it to answer the question that's being asked for you. Do not refer to other questions within your response. So again, the evaluator can only mark what you've submitted. So if you're answering question number 5, don't respond and say, see response to question number 4. They won't go to question number 4 to see that response. So they can't give you the marks for it. You can't say see above, refer to previous answers. They're not acceptable. And if that's the only response, you will score a 0. So you have to ensure that your response to each question stands alone and it provides all the necessary information without relying on the information from a question previously, unless it's specifically asked, how does question number 4 help you with question number 5? It won't gain you any marks. Last but not least, attachments and external links. You might be tempted to refer to your website, for example. If there's a question on carbon net zero or modern slavery, you might be tempted to say, oh, here's a link to our website where you can read our policy. Our evaluators will not be able to click on your external links to review that. That's not how we do our marking. That's not how we do our scoring. So any external links, they will essentially be ignored, for lack of a better word. So always make sure that you respond to the question asked within the space that you've got, within the character limits that you've got, because any external information that hasn't been asked for will not be assessed and will not earn you any marks. So final tips in terms of hopefully being successful with your tender is, number 1 is to plan. It's important to allocate sufficient time to complete your tender return. There is a bank holiday in May, so we have extended it by about 1 day. You still get 30 days, which is about 4 working weeks or so to complete and return your tender. Last minute responses are more likely to involve mistakes or omissions, so try to plan your time according to the timelines that are specified within the ITT, and keep in mind that requests for extensions may not be granted, so it's essential that you adhere to the provided deadlines, especially with this framework and the timescale that we're trying to get it out in. It's very unlikely that an extension request will be granted. There is also a clarification process. So if you encounter any uncertainties about the documents, you can make use of the clarification process rather than risk misinterpretation. So it's advisable to review the documentation as early as possible, so that if you do have any clarifications, you can submit this before the deadline. Any clarifications that are sought before the deadline, the clarification deadline will not receive a response. Number 3, compliance. Ensure that your bid is compliant. Don't ignore the specification and respond with what you want to offer as opposed to what we've specified, because again, that won't gain you any marks. You have to kind of be able to, your offering has to be in line with what we require as an organisation and what our members also require. Answer all the questions. So some elements of the tender are for information only and they don't attract a weighting. However, that doesn't mean that those sections should be ignored. So we do need you to answer all questions that are asked within the tender. And lastly, no second chances. You won't get a second chance at this. There's just no other way to phrase that. So don't rush, don't submit an incomplete response. We can't ask you for clarifications once you've submitted your responses, because we can't help you to improve your response through clarifications. So we'll only mark or evaluate what you have submitted. And just keep in mind also that your past experience with NW or our members won't count, and only what you write in your tender will be scored. So for clarification, that means if you're an incumbent supplier and we're aware of the kind of work that you do, or we're aware of your experience. We can't score you based on the experience or what we know that you can deliver. We can only score you based on what you respond and what you submit in this actual tender. So it's important to not just rely on the fact that you have experience with NW or you have experience with our members. And this is the last slide. This is the project timeline for the framework. So the contract notice will be published this afternoon, at hopefully before 4 p.m, but definitely today because it's ready to go. The clarification period opens tomorrow and closes on the 29th of May. The deadline for tender submissions is the 10th of June. We intend to send out our notification of intention to award by the 31st of July and to award by the 12th of August, with hopefully a commencement date of the 1st of September. And that is the end of the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Are there any questions at this point?
Yes, Mary. So there's some in the chat function. Would you prefer just to look at the chat function yourself? There's only about 7 questions. Might be just easier to read from the top.
Yeah, I'll do that. Okay.
The first one is Jonathan Cunningham at 12:10.
Okay. When will the ITT be published and when is the intended return date? Okay, so it'll be published today, this afternoon, and then the start of the 30-day period is tomorrow, and the intended return date is the 10th of June. The 10th of June. So it also takes into account that there's one bank holiday coming up at the end of May. Peter has asked, will there be a supplier ranking with associated direct award routes? Yes, so each lot will have a supplier ranking. You may already have experience with that, and if a member wants to direct award, they will normally go through the rankings as it stands. So if supplier number 1 can't deliver for whatever reason, then they'll move on to supplier number 2 and just go down the list until they're able to get somebody that can deliver their requirements. What are the minimum turnover levels? Bear with me a moment, I'll just get that for you. Apologies. So for lot 1, a minimum turnover hasn't been requested for lot 1. The reason for that being is that the market has previously demonstrated the ability to meet that minimum requirement, so it's not been stipulated this time around. And then for lot 2 and lot 3, there are minimum turnover requirements. Bear with me. Okay, so for lot 2, we have a minimum turnover requirement of 2.75 million. And for lot 3, we have a minimum turnover requirement of 500,000. The next question is carbon reduction included in the quality weighting? If so, what percentage overall? So carbon reduction has not been included in the quality weighting. We do ask for your carbon reduction. We ask if you have a carbon reduction plan as part of the selection criteria. Bear with me. Sorry, I can't really multitask very well. So as questions are coming in, my brain is just frazzling. So I do apologize for the stop and start of it all. So our responsible procurement segment does not include carbon reduction. We've limited it to packaging and labour conditions. I think that answers your question, Peter. Jonathan, you've asked if the desktop award criteria needs to be stipulated at the point of issuing the tender. Sorry, can you just expand a bit more on what you mean by that question, Jonathan? Are you able to unmute? I'm not sure.
I'll see if I can unmute. There you go, Jonathan's microphone is now allowed.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes.
Okay, yeah, I was just asking, under your different award criterias, you've got direct award, your desktop calculator, and you also have your further competition. What I was asking is if somebody wishes to put a tender out using the desktop calculator, do they have to stipulate that at the point of tendering? It's not, or is it something they can do retrospectively once they've received the tenders back?
No, so they'll have to stipulate it at the point of tendering. Transparency requires them to be quite open and upfront about how they're evaluating. So if they're varying it, they need to stipulate that at the start at which they go out for that mini competition. So you should definitely be aware at the point of receiving the tender before responding.
Okay, thank you.
You've also asked if there'll be a character limit for the questions. If so, is this known yet? So yeah, each question does have a character limit. It varies between 2,000 and 3,000. Again, when you go to respond and EU supply, each question has at the end of the question what the character limit is. But it's between 2,000 to 3,000, possibly 3,500. But again, it's on a question by question basis. So just make sure that you check the question that you're responding to before responding to know how many characters. Will you consider waiting to release? Right. The question from Kyle, will you consider waiting to release this tender until bidders have submitted the current NEUPC AV framework tender? Unfortunately not, no. As I stated earlier on, we are already on a bit of a delayed timeline and we have had to extend the current framework a couple of times. And this framework is regional as opposed to NE, which is national. So our members are in need of the reiteration and the replacement framework. So we can't delay it any further than we've already delayed it. Okay. Peter has asked if the direct award have a maximum PO amount. Current contract is 25k, which is not really applicable to many awards. So we don't stipulate a limit on direct award. There are thresholds placed on it by PCR 15. However, each member institution have their own policies on, I guess, how much they can direct award. So that is more at the member's discretion as opposed to NW's stipulations or advice. I hope that's clear. Is the CPC partnership against the whole contract or just lot one? So CPC can use every single lot that's available. So it's against the whole contract. This is the first tender that is not taking. Okay, fair enough. We have stipulated within our specification of requirements what we kind of expect. I don't know if you were expecting an answer to that, Peter, or if it's just a statement that you're making. I don't know, David, could you unmute Peter if he has more to ask to that and more to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just do that now.
Thank you.
Sorry, which Peter is this? Peter.
Oh, sorry, Peter Coulthard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Peter, your mic's open now.
Okay. All right, no problem. It's not a question, so there's no response, but carbon reduction is part of the specification of requirements, and we ask it within SQ if you've got a carbon reduction plan. We have tried to keep this very minimal in terms of questions because it makes it quite onerous on suppliers yourself and evaluators on our end as well. So there are some things that we just expect as standard and they've been included within our specification of requirements. Okay. Jonathan, your comment on the 3,000 characters not being very much. 2,000 characters, between 2,000 and 3,000 has been the norm for NWUPC, and we don't tend to normally have any issues kind of stated within that. So I guess the only advice I can give within that is to just, I guess, try your best to keep it as concise as possible within the character limits that have been stated. There's about 11 questions or so per lot. So 2 sides of A4 per lot is a lot for evaluators and also a lot for our suppliers. And we're just trying to make it as little of an onerous experience and activity exercise as we can. It should be 3,000 words. I'll take that on board. But at this moment, we are just sort of in a character limit. Okay, Karen has asked, what is the rationale for limiting the number of lots that you can be awarded onto? That's a good question. So especially in relation to lots 2 and 3, we are just trying to make it as accessible as we can for SMEs and just remove barriers to entry and barriers to being able to tender. And that's one of the ways that we're finding that we're able to do that and make it a bit more accessible as well to local integrators. Apologies. Where can we find a list of all the equipment types found on this lot? That will be made available on the ITT document, which has a full list of the type of equipment under lots 1, 2, and 3, which is the same, except lots 2 and 3 include associated services and installation. And again, the list that we've provided on the ITT is not exhaustive. So there will be other equipment that falls under the AV bracket that's probably not listed underneath that, but we would still expect that our members should be able to procure under the framework, under the relevant law from yourselves as suppliers. I think that's all the questions. Are there any more questions? Just feel free to raise your hand if you do have any more questions at this point that's not been put in the chat or hasn't been answered. No? Okay. Well, thank you all very much for your time this afternoon. And thank you for joining me. The tender will be published today and will go live today. Again, like I said, clarification period opens tomorrow. So if at any point from then on you have questions, please feel free to submit those via the EU supply, and they will be getting responses, if not daily, at least on a weekly basis. So thank you all very much for your time. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.